The gavel freezes midair. Every breath in courtroom 7 stops. 8-year-old Elijah Washington's trembling finger points directly at Judge Rebecca Williams as his voice cracks the silence. "You're my real mother. I remember your perfume. I remember your lullabies." The judge's face turns ghostly white. Her gavel crashes down. Before we dive into this incredible story, I'd love to know where you're watching from. Drop your location in the comments. Hit that like button if you're ready for a story that will completely blow your mind, and make sure to subscribe, because what happens next will shake you to your core. This isn't just any courtroom drama. This is about a little boy whose words will unravel one of the most shocking conspiracies you've ever heard. Trust me, you won't want to miss a single detail of what's coming next. Judge Rebecca Williams had spent 22 years building an unshakable reputation on the bench in Detroit Family Court. At 52, she was known throughout Michigan as the Iron Lady of Justice, a black woman who had climbed from poverty to become one of the most respected judges in the state. Her courtroom was her sanctuary. Her decisions were final. Her word was law. She had presided over thousands of custody cases, adoption hearings, and family disputes, always maintaining perfect composure. Nothing had ever rattled her, until today. The morning started like any other Tuesday in October. The crisp autumn air carried the scent of burning leaves through the courthouse windows as Judge Williams reviewed her docket. Case number 27 seemed routine, a foster care placement hearing for 8-year-old Elijah Washington. The boy had been in the system since he was 3, bouncing between 7 different foster homes like a ping-pong ball. Nobody wanted to keep him. His current placement was with the Hendersons, a well-meaning white couple from suburban Bloomfield Hills who were seeking permanent custody. According to his case file, Elijah was what social services politely called challenging. He had nightmares every night, insisting his real mother was still alive and searching for him. He drew disturbing pictures of courtrooms and judges, and he had a habit of staring at authority figures with an intensity that made grown adults uncomfortable. The Hendersons sat in the front row, their hands clasped nervously as they waited for their names to be called. Between them sat Elijah, a small boy with intelligent dark eyes and a serious expression that seemed far too mature for his 8 years. He wore a pressed white shirt and navy slacks the Hendersons had bought specially for court, but somehow, he still looked like he didn't belong. His eyes kept scanning the courtroom, studying every detail with the focus of someone searching for something important. Social worker Janet Pierce stood at the podium, presenting Elijah's case with the practiced efficiency of someone who had done this thousands of times. She described his behavioral issues in clinical terms: attachment disorder, possible PTSD, resistance to authority figures. She also mentioned his recurring claims that his real mother was a judge, something she dismissed as a fantasy born from trauma. The Hendersons took their turn at the podium, expressing their genuine desire to provide Elijah with a stable home. Mrs. Henderson's voice wavered as she talked about the boy's nightmares, how he would wake up screaming for someone who wasn't there. Mr. Henderson mentioned Elijah's unusual intelligence, how he knew legal terms no 8-year-old should understand, how he could describe courtroom procedures with startling accuracy. Judge Williams listened to it all with her usual professional detachment, making notes and asking standard questions. She had heard similar stories before. Traumatized children often created elaborate fantasies about their origins, especially when their real history was painful or unknown. But something about this case felt different. Every time she looked at Elijah, she felt an odd flutter in her chest, a sense of recognition she couldn't quite place. The boy was staring at her with those intense dark eyes, and she found herself avoiding his gaze. When she did meet his eyes, she saw something that made her deeply uncomfortable: familiarity. As the hearing progressed, Judge Williams began noticing details about Elijah that shouldn't have mattered, but somehow did. The way he tilted his head when concentrating, the way his left hand moved when he was thinking. A small birthmark on his wrist that looked like a crescent moon. She found herself studying his features more closely than she should have, looking for something she couldn't name. The Hendersons finished. Their testimony ended, and Janet Pierce, was wrapping up her recommendation for permanent placement when it happened. Elijah suddenly stood up, ignoring Mrs. Henderson's urgent whispers for him to sit down. He walked to the center of the courtroom, his small figure somehow commanding attention in a way that should have been impossible for a child his age. Every person in the room turned to watch him, sensing that something significant was about to happen. Judge Williams felt her heart rate spike as Elijah looked directly at her. His young face was serious, almost solemn, as if he were about to deliver the most important testimony of his life. When he spoke, his voice was clear and steady, cutting through the courtroom silence like a blade. "You're my real mother. I remember your perfume. I remember your lullabies." The words hit Judge Williams like a physical blow. Her carefully maintained composure cracked, and she felt the blood drain from her face. The courtroom erupted into chaos. Bailiffs moved toward Elijah, unsure whether or not to restrain an 8-year-old. Lawyers jumped to their feet, shouting objections and demands for order. The Hendersons gasped in shock, reaching for Elijah, even as he stepped away from them. But Judge Williams couldn't move, couldn't speak, couldn't do anything but stare at the boy who had just shattered her world with 7 simple words. Her hands were shaking so violently she had to grip the edge of her bench just to steady herself. Her vision blurred, and for a terrifying moment, she thought she might faint, right there, in front of everyone. Because deep in her heart, in a place she had locked away 15 years ago, she knew that Elijah Washington might be telling the truth. With tremendous effort, she managed to bang her gavel and call for a 30-minute recess. As the courtroom slowly emptied, she remained frozen in her chair, staring at the spot where Elijah had stood. When she was finally alone, she reached into her desk drawer with trembling fingers and pulled out a small, hidden photograph of a baby boy. A baby with the same intelligent dark eyes, the same crescent-shaped birthmark on his left wrist. The silence in Judge Williams's chambers was deafening as she sat there alone, clutching the faded photograph with hands that wouldn't stop shaking. The image was worn from years of secret handling, a newborn baby with perfect features and those unmistakable dark eyes that had haunted her dreams for 15 years. She had hidden the photo behind official court documents, never daring to look at it for more than a few seconds at a time. But now, with Elijah's words echoing in her mind, she couldn't look away. The memories came flooding back, like a dam bursting in her mind, releasing 15 years of carefully suppressed pain. She had been 27 then, a brilliant young attorney, with unlimited potential and crushing pressure from her ambitious family. The Williams name carried weight in Detroit's legal circles. Her father had been a respected prosecutor. Her grandfather, a pioneering black judge who had broken barriers. In the 1960s, Rebecca, screaming for someone who wasn't there. Mr. Henderson mentioned Elijah's unusual intelligence, how he knew legal terms no 8-year-old should understand, how he could describe courtroom procedures with startling accuracy. Judge Williams listened to it all with her usual professional detachment, making notes and asking standard questions. She had heard similar stories before. Traumatized children often created elaborate fantasies about their origins, especially when their real history was painful or unknown. But something about this case felt different. Every time she looked at Elijah, she felt an odd flutter in her chest, a sense of recognition she couldn't quite place. The boy was staring at her with those intense dark eyes, and she found herself avoiding his gaze. When she did meet his eyes, she saw something that made her deeply uncomfortable. Familiarity. As the hearing progressed, Judge Williams began noticing details about Elijah that shouldn't have mattered, but somehow did. The way he tilted his head when concentrating, the way his left hand moved when he was thinking. A small birthmark on his wrist that looked like a crescent moon. She found herself studying his features more closely than she should have, looking for something she couldn't name. The Hendersons finished. Their testimony ended, and Janet Pierce was wrapping up her recommendation for permanent placement when it happened. Elijah suddenly stood up, ignoring Mrs. Henderson's urgent whispers for him to sit down. He walked to the center of the courtroom, his small figure somehow commanding attention in a way that should have been impossible for a child his age. Every person in the room turned to watch him, sensing that something significant was about to happen. Judge Williams felt her heart rate spike as Elijah looked directly at her, His young face was serious, almost solemn, as if he were about to deliver the most important testimony of his life. When he spoke, his voice was clear and steady, cutting through the courtroom silence like a blade. "You're my real mother. I remember your perfume. I remember your lullabies." The words hit Judge Williams like a physical blow. Her carefully maintained composure cracked, and she felt the blood drain from her face. The courtroom erupted into chaos. Bailiffs moved toward Elijah, unsure whether or not to restrain an 8-year-old. Lawyers jumped to their feet, shouting objections and demands for order. The Hendersons gasped in shock, reaching for Elijah, even as he stepped away from them. But Judge Williams couldn't move, couldn't speak, couldn't do anything but stare at the boy who had just shattered her world with 7 simple words. Her hands were shaking so violently she had to grip the edge of her bench just to steady herself. Her vision blurred, and for a terrifying moment, she thought she might faint, right there, in front of everyone. Because deep in her heart, in a place she had locked away 15 years ago, she knew that Elijah Washington might be telling the truth. With tremendous effort, she managed to bang her gavel and call for a 30-minute recess. As the courtroom slowly emptied, she remained frozen in her chair, staring at the spot where Elijah had stood. When she was finally alone, she reached into her desk drawer with trembling fingers and pulled out a small, hidden photograph of a baby boy. A baby with the same intelligent dark eyes, the same crescent-shaped birthmark on his left wrist. The silence in Judge Williams's chambers was deafening as she sat there alone, clutching the faded photograph with hands that wouldn't stop shaking. The image was worn from years of secret handling, a newborn baby with perfect features and those unmistakable dark eyes that had haunted her dreams for 15 years. She had hidden the photo behind official court documents, never daring to look at it for more than a few seconds at a time. But now, with Elijah's words echoing in her mind, she couldn't look away. The memories came flooding back, like a dam bursting in her mind, releasing 15 years of carefully suppressed pain. She had been 27 then, a brilliant young attorney, with unlimited potential and crushing pressure from her ambitious family. The Williams name carried weight in Detroit's legal circles. Her father had been a respected prosecutor. Her grandfather, a pioneering black judge who had broken barriers in the 1960s, Rebecca. She was supposed to be the crown jewel of the family legacy, the one who would achieve greatness beyond anything previous generations had imagined. But then came the pregnancy. She had kept it secret for 6 months, terrified of what it would mean for her career. This was the late 2000s, when being an unmarried black mother in the legal profession was still seen as career suicide. Her mother had been merciless when she finally found out. "A black unwed mother will never make judge," she had said with cold finality. "You have a choice, Rebecca. Your career or that baby. You cannot have both." The family lawyer, Robert Sterling, had presented what seemed like the perfect solution. He specialized in private adoptions, discreet arrangements for families who needed to handle sensitive situations quietly. He assured Rebecca that her baby would go to a loving family, people who desperately wanted a child, and could provide opportunities she couldn't offer as a struggling single attorney. The arrangement would be completely confidential. She would never see the baby again, never know where he went, never have any contact. It would be as if the pregnancy had never happened. Rebecca had agreed because she was young, scared, and believed she had no other choice. She told herself she was being selfless, giving her child a better life than she could provide. But the moment they placed her newborn son in her arms at the hospital, she knew she was making the worst mistake of her life. She had 2 hours with him before Sterling's people came to take him away. 2 hours to memorize his perfect little face, to sing him the lullabies her own mother had sung to her, to breathe in his sweet baby scent and promise him silently that she would never forget him. She whispered to him about how much she loved him, how sorry she was, how she hoped he would understand someday that this was the hardest thing she had ever done. When they took him away, a piece of her soul went with him. She had named him Daniel in her heart, though she knew his adoptive parents would probably change it. Now, sitting in her chambers 15 years later, Rebecca realized with growing horror that her Daniel might be Elijah Washington. the boy in her courtroom who had been failed by a system that was supposed to protect him. She picked up the phone and called her private investigator, David Knox, a former police detective who handled sensitive cases for judges and attorneys who needed to keep things quiet. When he answered, her voice was barely a whisper. "David, I need you to investigate a child in my courtroom. Immediately. Elijah Washington, 8 years old, currently in foster care with the Henderson family. I need to know everything: his background, his placement, history, and especially his adoption records from when he was an infant." Knox had worked for Rebecca for 5 years, assisting with background checks on court personnel and private security matters. He had never heard her sound like this. "Judge Williams, are you all right? You sound like you've seen a ghost." She almost laughed at the accuracy of his words. "Maybe I have, David. Maybe I have. I need this information today. Money is no object. Call in every favor you have." While Knox began his investigation, Rebecca learned that Elijah had been taken to Child Protective Services for immediate psychological evaluation. It was standard procedure after an outburst in court to assess whether the child was experiencing a mental health crisis or posed any safety concerns. Dr. Sarah Rodriguez, the court's chief child psychologist, was conducting the evaluation at the CPS facility downtown. Rebecca knew she shouldn't interfere, but she called Dr. Rodriguez anyway. "Sarah, I need to know about the Washington boys' evaluation. There may be circumstances about this case that require special attention." Dr. Rodriguez had worked with the court for 8 years and had never heard Judge Williams make such a personal request. "Rebecca, I can't discuss an ongoing evaluation. You know that." She hesitated, then added, "But I will say this. This boy is remarkable. His memories are incredibly detailed and specific. He's describing things about your courtroom that only someone who had spent significant time there would know. He drew a picture of your private bathroom, including the lavender soap dispenser and the framed photo of the scales of justice that you keep on the windowsill. How would an 8-year-old know those details unless—" She didn't finish the sentence, but they both understood the implications. Rebecca spent the rest of the afternoon researching Elijah's case history, using her judicial access to court records. What she found made her stomach turn. Elijah had been placed in 7 different foster homes since entering the system at age 3. The first family, the Clarks, had returned him after 6 months, claiming he was too difficult. The reports mentioned that Elijah would have screaming fits whenever anyone mentioned adoption, insisting his real mother was coming for him. The second family, the Jansens, had kept him for 8 months before giving up. Their reports described a child who would stare at family court judges on television, becoming visibly agitated and claiming he recognized them. They punished him for these fantasies by making him sleep in the garage when he refused to stop talking about his mother being a judge. Each subsequent placement had been shorter than the last. Foster families complained that Elijah was too intelligent, too intense, too convinced that his elaborate stories about his origins were real. Social workers had diagnosed him with attachment disorder and recommended therapy, but nothing seemed to help. He remained convinced that his mother was alive, that she was important, and that she would find him someday. When David Knox called back at 6U, his voice was grim. "Judge Williams, I've got some information, but you're not going to like it. Elijah Washington's adoption records don't exist. I mean, they were destroyed in what's listed as a routine file purge at Sterling Family Services back in 2018. Rebecca felt a chill run through her. "But here's the thing that's really bothering me," Knox continued. Sterling Family Services had their license revoked that same year for what the state called irregularities in placement procedures. The agency that had arranged her son's adoption 15 years ago had been shut down for illegal practices. Rebecca felt the room spinning around her. What kind of irregularities? Knox didn't hesitate. The kind where children placed for adoption were never actually adopted. The kind where birth mothers were told their babies went to loving families, when really they ended up in the foster system under false identities. "Judge Williams," Knox said carefully, "I think you need to prepare yourself for the possibility that your son never left Detroit. I think he's been right here all along." The next morning found Rebecca sitting across from David Knox in Mel's diner, a grimy downtown establishment where lawyers and cops grabbed quick coffee between cases. She had chosen this place specifically because none of her judicial colleagues would ever be caught dead in such a dive. The conversation she was about to have could destroy everything she had worked her entire life to build. Knox slid a thick, manila folder across the scarred Formica table, his expression grimmer than she had ever seen it. "What I found is going to change everything, Judge Williams. And I mean everything." Rebecca's hands trembled as she opened the folder. Inside were photocopied documents, surveillance photos, and a timeline that made her blood run cold. Knox had worked through the night, calling in favors from contacts in law enforcement, social services, and the underground network of investigators who specialized in finding what powerful people wanted to stay hidden. "Elijah Washington's birth certificate is a forgery," Knox began, keeping his voice low despite the nearly empty dinner. "The parents listed, Jennifer and Marcus Washington, died in a car accident in 2016. But here's the problem. The car accident report shows they were childless. No Elijah, no adoption records, nothing." He paused, letting the words sink in. "Someone created an entire false identity for this boy and inserted him into the foster system using dead people's names." Rebecca felt nauseous. And then Knox dropped the bomb. Sterling Family Services didn't just handle irregular adoptions, they were running a full-scale child trafficking operation. Rebecca's eyes widened. They took babies from desperate mothers. Knox continued, his tone razor-sharp. Told them the children were going to loving families, but instead, they sold the kids to whoever paid the most. He flipped to a page with ledgers, transaction records, and coded emails. But sometimes the sales fell through, or the buyers changed their minds, or the children got too old to be profitable. His voice dropped even lower. When that happened, Sterling dumped them into the foster system under false identities, making them essentially disappear. The implications hit Rebecca like a physical blow. "You're saying my son wasn't adopted by a loving family? You're saying he was abandoned in the foster system when he was 3 years old?" Knox nodded grimly. "And it gets worse. I managed to get access to some of Sterling's old financial records before they were sealed. Your family paid $300,000 for what they called a complete disappearance service. That wasn't an adoption fee, Judge Williams. That was payment to make. Sure, your son could never be traced back to you." Rebecca stared at the documents through blurred vision. Her own mother had paid extra to ensure her grandson would vanish completely, that there would be no paper trail, no possibility of reunion, no chance for Rebecca to change her mind and try to find him. The woman who had raised her to value justice, above all else, had participated in the destruction of an innocent child's life. Meanwhile, 20 miles away at Patricia Williams' house, Elijah was beginning to settle into yet another temporary placement. Patricia was a 68-year-old retired teacher who had been taking in emergency foster children for 15 years. She had seen every kind of trauma, every form of damage that the system could inflict on young minds. But there was something different about Elijah Washington. While most children his age would be playing video games or watching cartoons, Elijah spent his time reading Patricia's law books and asking sophisticated questions about the legal system. He spoke with a vocabulary that belonged to someone 3 times his age, using terms like judicial procedure and custody protocols as naturally as other children talked about toys. "Miss Patricia," Elijah said on his second morning there, looking up from a dusty copy of Michigan Family Law that he had somehow found in her bookshelf. "Why do judges wear black robes? Is it because they're supposed to be like shadows of justice?" Patricia nearly dropped her coffee cup. This was not a normal 8-year-old question. "Honey, where did you learn words like that?" Elijah's expression became distant, as if he were looking at something Patricia couldn't see. "My real mother taught me," he said softly. "She used to tell me that judges were like guardians of fairness, that their robes were black to remind everyone that justice doesn't see color or wealth or power. She said the gavel was like a magic wand that could make right things happen for people who needed help." Patricia sat down beside him, studying his serious young face. In 15 years of foster care, she had never met a child who maintained such detailed, consistent memories of a birth parent. Most children created fantasies, but their stories changed over time. becoming more elaborate or contradictory. Elijah's memories were different. They were specific, consistent, and filled with details that suggested real experiences rather than wishful thinking. "Tell me more about your real mother, sweetheart," Patricia said gently. Elijah's eyes lit up with a joy that broke Patricia's heart. "She smells like lavender and vanilla. She has the most beautiful singing voice, especially when she sings the song about the mockingbird. Her hands are soft but strong, and she has a little scar on her thumb from when she was learning to cook and cut herself with a knife. She promised me she would always find me, no matter how far away they took me." Patricia felt chills run down her spine. These weren't the vague memories of a toddler. These were the detailed recollections of someone who had spent significant time with a specific person. "Elijah, honey, how old were you when you last saw your real mother?" "I was 3, he said simply. "But I remember everything. They told me she was dead, but I knew they were lying. I could feel her. Still loving me. Still looking for me. And yesterday in that courtroom, when I saw her sitting up there in her black robe with her gavel, I knew it was her. I knew my mother had found me." The phone rang before Patricia could respond, startling them both. It was Rebecca Williams, and her voice was strained with emotion. "Mrs. Williams, this is Judge Rebecca Williams from Family Court. I need to ask you about Elijah Washington. Has he mentioned anything about his memories of his birth mother?" Patricia looked at Elijah, who was watching her with those intense, dark eyes. "Judge Williams," she said slowly, "this child has been telling me things that no 8-year-old should be able to remember. Detailed, specific things about someone who obviously meant the world to him. And after what happened in your courtroom yesterday, I'm starting to think we need to take his memories very seriously." There was a long pause before Rebecca spoke again, and when she did, her voice was barely a whisper. "Mrs. Williams, I'm going to ask you something that could get us both in serious trouble. I need to see Elijah privately. There are things about his case that require immediate investigation, and I can't go through official channels. Would you be willing to arrange an unofficial meeting?" Patricia looked at Elijah again, seeing the hope that had transformed his young face at the mention of the judge's name. "Judge Williams, that boy has been waiting his whole life for his mother to find him. If there's any chance you're who he thinks you are, then we need to find out immediately. Come tonight after dark. And Judge Williams..." She paused. "You better be prepared for what you might discover. Now I need you to tell me something. Do you think Judge Williams should risk everything to find out if Elijah is really her son? Comment 1 if you believe she should take the risk, even if it destroys her career. Hit that like button if you're as invested in this story as I am. And make sure you're subscribed, because the next part will reveal secrets that will change everything you think you know about this case. What do you think will happen when Rebecca finally comes face to face with Elijah outside the courtroom? Will he really remember her after 15 years? Or is this all a heartbreaking coincidence? The truth is more shocking than you can imagine, and it's coming up next. At 9 that night, Rebecca Williams pulled into Patricia Williams's driveway with her heart hammering so hard she could hear it in her ears. She had spent the day wrestling with the decision, knowing that what she was about to do could end her career, destroy her reputation, and possibly land her in jail for judicial misconduct. But the possibility that Elijah was her son had consumed her every thought, making it impossible to focus on anything else. She sat in her car for several minutes, gathering courage she wasn't sure she possessed. Through the living room window, she could see Patricia and Elijah sitting together on the couch, the boy's head bent over what appeared to be a book. Even from this distance, even in the dim light, something about his posture, the way he held his head, sent shockwaves of recognition through her body. When Patricia opened the front door, Elijah was standing beside her, and the moment Rebecca stepped inside, her world, the world tilted on its axis. Elijah took one look at her and ran straight into her arms with a cry of pure joy. "Mommy, I knew you would come. I knew you wouldn't forget me." Rebecca caught him instinctively, and the feel of his small body against hers unleashed 15 years of suppressed grief and longing. He fit perfectly in her arms, as if no time had passed at all. But what shattered her completely was when, He looked up at her with tear-filled eyes and whispered, "You still smell like lavender and vanilla, just like I remembered." Patricia watched in amazement as Elijah began telling Rebecca things that no child his age should be able to remember. He described her car in detail, right down to the small dent in the rear bumper and the pine tree air freshener she kept hanging from the rearview mirror. He knew about her favorite coffee shop, the one she visited every Sunday morning to read, the newspaper and sip hazelnut lattes. He even knew about her private ritual of visiting the botanical garden on her birthday, something she had never told another living soul. "How do you know these things, sweetheart?" Rebecca asked, though her heart was already giving her the answer. "I used to go with you sometimes, before they took me away," Elijah said softly. "You would carry me in a blue baby seat and talk to me about everything we saw. You told me the names of all the flowers, and you said that gardens were proof that beautiful things could grow even in the hardest ground." Rebecca's vision blurred with tears as memories she had forced herself to forget came flooding back. She had taken her infant son to the botanical garden, twice during those precious 2 hours at the hospital, and once more when she had snuck him out briefly before surrendering him to Sterling's people. She had whispered to him about flowers and hope and love, never imagining that her 3-month-old baby would somehow retain those memories. Rebecca listened in stunned silence as the evening unfolded. Elijah continued to demonstrate knowledge that seemed impossible for a child his age. He spoke fluently about legal terminology, court procedures, and judicial protocols, as if he had spent years studying law. When Rebecca mentioned a case she was currently working on, he asked intelligent, pointed questions about precedent and procedure, questions that would have impressed a panel of law school professors. But it was when he began talking about his early foster placements that Rebecca's shock turned to seething rage. Elijah described being locked in a basement by the Clark family whenever he insisted that his mother was still alive. He told her about the Jansens, who made him sleep in the garage as punishment for drawing pictures of courtrooms and judges. He remembered the Patterson family, who returned him to social services after just 2 weeks, claiming he cried too much for his dead mother. Each story was worse than the last. 15 years of systematic, emotional abuse, all inflicted on a child whose only crime was remembering love and refusing to give up hope. "They kept telling me you were dead," Elijah whispered, curled up against Rebecca's side on Patricia's worn-out couch. "But I could feel in my heart that you were still alive, still looking for me. The social workers said I was sick for believing it, that I needed medication to help me forget my fantasies. But they weren't fantasies, were they, Mommy?" Rebecca held him tighter, her heart cracking under the weight of his pain, her fury at the system that had failed him mounting with every word. "No, baby," she said fiercely, kissing the top of his head. "They weren't fantasies. I never stopped loving you, not for a single second. You and I never stopped hoping I would find you someday," Rebecca whispered, brushing Elijah's curls back from his forehead. Patricia, who had been listening in stunned silence, finally spoke. "Judge Williams, what Elijah is describing sounds like systematic psychological abuse, designed to break his connection to his birth family. In my 15 years as a foster caregiver, I've never seen anything like it. It's as if someone deliberately placed him with families who would traumatize him for holding on to his memories." The next morning, Rebecca met with David Knox again, this time in her private chambers, where the walls themselves felt heavy with the secrets she was about to unleash. She had made her decision. She was going to risk everything to uncover the truth. Consequences be damned. "David, I need you to dig deeper into Sterling Family Services. I want to know how many children went through their system, what happened to them, and who was responsible for placing them. And I need a DNA test, done immediately." Knox looked uneasy. "Judge Williams, if word of this gets out, you could be facing impeachment proceedings, criminal charges, the end of your career. Are you absolutely sure you want to go down this road?" Rebecca thought of Elijah, finally sleeping peacefully at Patricia's house, finally safe, finally reunited with the mother he had never stopped believing in. She met Knox's gaze, steady and resolute. "David, I've spent 22 years on this bench making decisions that shape children's lives. If there's even a chance that I've been part of a system that stole my own child, and God knows how many others, then I have a duty to expose it, no matter what it costs me. Over the next 3 days, Knox's investigation uncovered horrors neither of them had imagined. Sterling Family Services had been far worse than a corrupt agency. It had been a pipeline, a polished, government-sanctioned machine designed to erase children from their origins and sell them into lives chosen not for love or care, but for profit. Sterling Family Services had been operating for over 30 years, handling more than 2,000 children. The agency specialized in targeting vulnerable mothers, particularly young black women without family support or financial stability. These women were promised that their babies would be placed with loving adoptive families. But in truth, Sterling either sold the children to the highest bidder or dumped them into the foster system when the deals fell through. But the most disturbing discovery was this: Sterling hadn't acted alone. The operation extended far beyond a single corrupt agency. It involved social workers, family court judges, attorneys, even some foster families, who were paid to psychologically break children, to traumatize them into forgetting who they were and where they came from. It was a systematic, organized effort to erase family bonds and manufacture untraceable children who could be exploited without consequence. Judge Williams, Knox said, his voice thick with disgust, "I've found records of at least 40 other children who were placed into the foster system under false identities after Sterling's adoption deals fell apart. Most were told their birth parents were dead, just like Elijah was." He paused, visibly disturbed. And here's the really sick part. Several of these children were placed with foster families who were explicitly instructed, to punish them if they spoke about their birth parents or remembered anything about their early lives. Rebecca felt her stomach turn, nausea rising in her throat as the scale of the conspiracy hit her like a blow to the chest. "You're telling me children were deliberately traumatized to make them forget their own families?" Knox nodded grimly. "It gets worse. Some sitting judges had children who went through Sterling's system, not just you. Do you want to see part 2 of Rebecca's story? If yes, comment part 2 below. This story is just getting started, and the next chapter will reveal even more shocking secrets. Don't forget to like and subscribe so you don't miss it.